Memories. Support our fight to protect yours.
Well, Nick, first of all, thank you very much for coming on to the show. Welcome to Memories.
Thank you.
You've had a fantastic life. Obviously, rock and roll came first. What age were you when you actually got into proper music, if you know what I mean, and getting to the big time?
Well, I think probably what I'd better do is start perhaps more at the beginning, because actually, of course, cars came long before rock and roll, because when I was a very small boy, rock and roll hadn't actually been invented. Whereas my father has always been involved in cars and motorsport. And so I was brought up in a family where the family car was a 4.5 litre Bentley, and the ultimate treat was to go and watch my dad club racing at Silverstone with the Bentley.
Well, there's a good story in the fact that you all had to pile into the Bentley, probably not knowing that he was going to race, I don't know, but be driven to Silverstone, and then he would run a race and then drive back home in the Bentley.
Absolutely, and if we'd done well, we'd stop at the Bell at Aston Clinton, which was the height of my restaurant sort of experience at the time.
And well, in that case, I see you as an aristocratic rock and roller. Because after all, I understand your first car was an Aston Martin. Would that be right?
No, not quite. Actually, my first car was an Austin 7, Chummy.
Ah.
And I got that before, in fact, while I was still learning. So that was my sort of introduction, the idea being that I would then learn how to fettle the car myself. Whereas, in fact, of course, what happened was my dad enjoyed fettling the car and I was allowed to borrow the Jag.
Well, I started off actually with an Austin as well. It was an Austin A35. No, an Austin A30 to begin with, 370 pounds it was, brand new. And I got it. And I got it because I was working in the garage my father had, and I was doing the petrol pumps, the forecourt petrol pumps and everything like that. And I got more tips than I did wages, and I was able to buy a brand new car. I bought it a month before I got my license. So I could have it all tarted up. It had tartan seat covers. It had the St Andrew's cross on the side in enamel. It was beautiful, and that was my first car. Thinking about Austin A40s and A45s, because the 45 came afterwards, and your daughter goes racing now, and had a double roll with an A35.
Have you ever seen the clip of it?
No, I haven't, but I'd be frightened if I was the father.
Well, after the event, it looks as though she rolls twice and then is still sitting there trying to urge the car on.
Clearly just like the father.
Yeah.
I'd rather go to music first of all, because I saw a picture not too long ago, and I think I may have mentioned it to you when I saw you some time ago there. You had extremely long hair, and of course I can't talk about long hair because I had a hell of a long hair when I was driving racing cars, but you really had longer hair than I had, I think.
Well, longer hair and a beard and a moustache to add even.
No, I never got that far. Now, what about those days? What took you to music and rock and roll?
Well, I think it's sort of hard to see quite where it really came from. I mean, my mum was musical, played piano really well. And I had a little bit of formal music education, but nothing that was going to stick. And I think it was just that breakthrough thing of early rock and roll with Bill Haley and Chuck Berry and so on. And I just thought, this is great. And I never thought of it as a career, of course. I actually, it was really just sort of luck and timing that I happened to, I played drums a little bit, and then I went to college to study architecture, and fell in with a bad lot in the shape of Roger and Rick, who were also in the same year. And I mean, the story was that someone came in and said, do any of you play an instrument? Because I've written some songs and I need to play them to a publisher. So Roger and I and Rick said, oh, well, we play a bit. And so we learnt these songs and played them to the publisher. And the publisher said, well, the songs are not bad, but the band are absolute rubbish. So of course, that fueled a sense of, we'll show them. And so the band sort of started as a college band. Then there were other, Sid Barrett came from living in Cambridge to go to Campbell Art School, and he joined. And that was when the band started to be something, because he was a writer. And so once we had original material, that's when you start to break through.
But I mean, Pink Floyd became an absolute giant. I mean, it's had recognition all around the world. You've had some of the biggest runs of success. I mean, the strange thing is, it seems that you are the only one that's been there all the way through.
Yeah, well, that's inevitable. That's to do with being the drummer. The drummer is the one person who cannot operate on his own. And,
no, but I mean, yeah, but I mean, the Beatles stayed together quite well. I mean, why are there so many changes? And there you were, all the way through from beginning to end.
It's very unusual for a band to be able to keep to remain a band for a long period of time. I mean, as you say, the Beatles are an example of it. Even the Beatles broke up. I mean, the Rolling Stones are quite extraordinary in that respect, that they've managed to retain that structure for such a long time. Virtually every other band at some point has either had personnel changes or folded or whatever.
Nick, what was the most memorable concert that Pink Floyd did?
Well, I think there's probably a few, but I think probably the ones there's probably two to mention. And the first one is playing a free concert in Venice, where it was the end of a world tour. And we ended up having a barge built. It was like a giant raft. And we floated off the end of St. Mark's Square and filmed. I mean, we filmed the whole thing as well, but it was quite extraordinary. It was what's the best way of putting it? The Venetians were divided as to whether it was a good idea or a bad idea. Half of them thought it was terrific, and half of them thought it was a bad idea. So there was a slight sort of sense of some cooperation on one half and lack of cooperation from the gondoliers in particular at one point. The other one I'd always mention is Live 8, which we played 2005 or whenever it was. And that was terrific because Pink Floyd tend to get quite well known for the fact that we won't speak to each other, or some of us won't speak to each other. And so actually to let bygones be bygones, get up on stage and do something for all the right reasons was very special, I think, and sort of quite grown up.
Well, when did the big passion of motor cars start then, considering the fact that you were obviously, as the band progressed, pretty busy going out, because that time I recognized you with the very long hair. It looked like you were in a coliseum of some kind. It looked like you might have been in I don't know where, but that was early days, I dare say, but it was already big time. When did cars, in the sense of, you must have been pretty busy in the music business, when did you get time to really get into cars?
Well, it was about the time you're talking about, because that must have been 1972. Pink Floyd at Pompeii was almost certainly the footage you would have seen, where we recorded a sort of live show without an audience in the old Pompeii amphitheatre. And about that time, we were just about to release Dark Side of the Moon. And it was Dark Side of the Moon that changed everything, really. Up until then, we were working really hard. And I actually looked at the figures for it, that in 1966, we did 6 or 7 gigs. In 1967, we did well over 200 and made an album.
Oh my God.
Suddenly switched. So then we were working pretty hard for the next 3 or 4 years. But once Dark Side had become so successful, first of all, we suddenly had money, which was one thing, and time as well, because we actually started work on the second album and it became a long drawn out affair. And that's when I actually went and bought my first a pre-war Aston Martin with the idea of racing it.
Dark Side, 250 million albums sold. I mean, that's a record. You've got a collection of cars now that a lot of people are very envious of. Did that just start gently and then suddenly you found as if you had to have a bigger barn?
Yeah, absolutely, because I never had any intention of becoming a car collector. What I actually wanted to do was go club racing, really mainly with a sort of vintage thing. And so I started with the Austin 7 and then went on to an Aston Martin International.
What year was it? What year of car was that?
That would have been about 1930.
Yeah, so it was a vintage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that led me on to an Aston Martin Ulster, which became the first car I did actually race. And it's a car I still have. Absolutely terrific little thing. It's one.
And what year is that?
1935. Yeah, I mean, the early Aston Martins they're not forgotten. There's still great interest, but it's quite specialised. Most people think of Astons as almost starting with James Bond and the DB4.
You've now got a huge collection of cars. A GTO, for example. You bought the GTO at the right time.
I paid about 30,000 for it in 1977, I think.
My goodness.
And
yeah. Excuse me, as a Scotsman asking, what is it worth now?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's very hard to tell because a lot of things get bandied about. But certainly, I think one was sold for around $70 million in America last year or two.
Not a bad investment.
No. I mean, I should have bought more of them.
Yeah. Well, of course, you've got quite a few. You've had quite a few Ferraris. Yeah.
And I'd certainly still have great affection, particularly for the slightly older ones. Yeah,
but you've got a wife that sort of wrote one off. Did you know? I seem to remember, was it Woodcott at Silverstone?
No, she didn't write it off, and that was a Maserati. That was there was the birdcage that she had an accident in, a long time ago now. But no, she didn't write it off. You don't write those cars off.
Well, most people might have considered it a write-off for the amount of money that it would have cost to repair it, put it that way. Well, you've lived such a colourful life, but I mean, clearly Pink Floyd is what you're most, I suppose, recognised for.
Well, if there hadn't been the band, there'd have been one vintage car, I guess. That would have
No,
been.
because I mean the rock and rollers. I mean, as you know, and you too was a great friend of George Harrison's. But I'm going to see Livy actually in a couple of days down at Friar Park.
Give it my love, please.
And of course, he was a wonderful man with a great enthusiasm for cars, and he had a McLaren. Because George really liked his cars and loved his cars, and of course came to racing a lot. When Stewart Grand Prix was racing, he came with us a great deal.
Yeah, he was. I do remember that very, very much.
So what's the deal now? You've gone back to rock and roll, have you not?
I have, yes. I mean, we're suffering at the moment because, of course, we can't tour, but about almost 2 years ago now, put a band together with some friends that playing just the really early Pink Floyd material, which is sometimes sort of less familiar, and it's been such fun.
Well, Pink Floyd is one of my favorite bands. Nick Mason's one of my favorite people. Every year we seem to see each other around racetracks, Goodwood, of course, and in Bahrain, because we've both become great friends of the Crown Prince of Bahrain, who started this wonderful racetrack that has taken, the Middle East to motorsport.
Yeah, no, it's a fabulous track, and I think it's benefited enormously when it became a night race as well, because it looks magnificent when it's all lit up. It's quite a special place.
Well, Nick Mason, thank you very much for joining this wee memory thing that I've got. Part of what I'm doing this for is because of Helen, and Helen's been part, you've known and been part of my life in motor cars for all those years, and she's got dementia now. So we're fighting to find a cure for dementia, and perhaps more importantly, preventive medicine. And Race Against Dementia, it's called. So part of what we're doing with this, with memories, is connected with that. And it's all friends that I know, that Helen's known, because she was my timekeeper and my lap charter. So Nick, thank you very much for joining us, and looking forward to seeing you probably, I hope, at Goodwood, if you've got time to get out of the music world just for a wee while.
I think we could fit that in.
All the very best.
All right. Same to you, Jackie. Thank you very much. Very honoured to be included.